Hello and welcome to Life in Recovery podcast episode 84. I hope you're doing well. Today my guest is Dr. Alison J Kay, PhD, who is the best-selling author of Vibrational Upgrade, A Conspiracy for Your Bliss. So she's a master mind-body energy medicine practitioner for more than 20 years and a world traveller who lived and worked at an international school in Asia for 10 years, whilst also performing energy healings on clients worldwide. So this is something quite different to the usual podcast, but I really hope that you enjoy listening to my conversation with Alison as much as I enjoyed speaking with her. And just before we jump into the podcast, please remember that you can support the podcast financially at patreon.com/Life in Recovery. Also, just to let you know that I am fully recovered from COVID-19. It was kind of nothing more than a mild flu really, but it lasted for about a week or so. And also I am over 3 weeks abstinent from chocolate. I know that you've heard me talk a lot about my chocolate addiction on the podcast. And just over 3 weeks ago, I made a decision to stop eating it and started working the 12 steps with my sponsor, and it's going really well so far. So, I think it's always worth sharing my recovery with you guys to give you a bit of hope and just to let you know that, it does work if you work it. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Alison Kay.
I used to try. I have three brothers. One's older by 3 years, and then I have two younger ones. And my older brother and I, ever since I was walking, really, we lived in a rural area outside of Boston and south of Boston, and we used to walk through the woods growing up. And he'd be in front of me, ahead, like jumping on dead tree limbs to break them. I mean, he was never destructing anything live. I just want to make that clear. But then there was I'm like behind him, and I'm like connecting with everything. I'm looking at the butterflies and the birds and like down into the clovers and the grass and playing with the little flowing things in the water, just feeling totally connected to everything. And I had an interview years ago where an interviewer asked me, how did you get like this? And it was in that moment I realized it went that far back, because what I had been saying prior to that is I had my first career in politics and organizing on political campaigns, and I had a lot of success. I was living in San Francisco at that time, and I was sent down to LA to do organizing, and I helped get this woman who was the first Latina elected to the California State Assembly out of LA. She ended up saving the last bit of green space in the whole LA area at that time, which I was proud and happy about, because it was electing people who were going to protect the environment to office. And I was stressed because I had so much success in the primary election campaign. They put me in a really important race between a developer and a conservationist for a seat up in the Sierra Nevadas. And my body was actually tight too. And so I was walking through a bookstore, and this like light purple book fell off the shelf, dropped at my feet, so like I would have had to step on it if I was going to continue walking. So I picked it up, and it was on meditation, and that was in 92, and I've been meditating ever since. And I took to it so naturally that I had the hubris to follow the signs and ended up being asked to teach meditation like within a year after that. So I started working with my own mind and consciousness and the mind-body connection back in 92. And so then after the election season was over, I wanted a break, and I got tickets for around the world. And first place I went to was where you are. I went to London, then I went up to the Lake District, and I had moved to San Francisco because my bachelor's, originally my very first major was psychology. And as I sat there semester after semester for 3 semesters total, listening to what I was learning, I wasn't hearing an answer to the question of how do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves. I was instead hearing about the hardwiring of the brain and how to apply it for industrial management. And it just was so not geared towards addressing how to be the happiest version of yourself. At the time they were working hard, it seemed to prove that they were a hard science. And so I switched majors and I ended up doing one in communications and started to understand our conditioning from advertisements, and because it was in mass communications. And then I switched from that to social thought, political economy, and finally ended up getting a major in a degree in English literature. And the focus was creative writing. So I studied humans, psychology, and society and sociology through an art form, English lit. So that was why I headed right over to the Lake District, because I wanted to connect with Wordsworth, who I had learned about. And so I traveled overseas, went halfway around the world, and ended up coming back to the States. My parents had moved to Florida out of Massachusetts. So I came here and I went for my master's, continuing the work that I had begun in politics, because I had moved to San Francisco to go for my master's in creative writing, and it was synchronicity that brought in the work with the political campaigns, and it was so aligned and felt so right. So I'm trying not to jump around a bit, but the master's was in public administration and environmental policy, and I got out and was, asking the question, where can I affect more change for the good? Is it within the system, like working in an EPA, a governmental agency, or is it outside the system, like with an NGO, a nonprofit, which is what I had been working for prior. And John, nothing was fitting. You know that feeling like when there's not a lot of doors opening and it's just not proceeding when you're going through something? You know that feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I understood. I took that as a sign and I started asking questions within to hear my own intuitive guidance, because at that point, my last year of my master's program, I had gotten my first energy medicine modality, which was Usui Reiki. And I was am only 6 removed from the founder of Reiki. I somehow struck it rich and got a really pure lineage. And so I had been meditating and, as I said, teaching meditation, and now I was working with energy medicine. So I was aware of what shifts in consciousness and one's thoughts and beliefs can do, and starting to become aware of energy, the subtle energy system, and how that works in correspondence with our mind. And I came up with the understanding, okay, Alison, if you're going to affect change, the system isn't ready right now. It's still way too invested in fossil fuels. It's not going to shift. If you want to actually get change, go one consciousness at a time. So what I did was I went into the classroom, the public school system here in Florida, teaching based on my English lit degree at the bachelor's level, and then gave energy medicine and holistic wellness sessions alongside that part-time, while teaching like meditation to particularly young boys at the middle school level, because that's what the level I started at, who were having like ADD and ADHD challenges. I didn't believe in the label because I had found out that they came out with Ritalin before they came out with the diagnosis that the medication was created for. So I was
Really?
a little...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and I could go into that a bit more if you want, but the point being is I was doing the work with consciousness and with energy medicine and subtle energies alongside the classroom teaching career. And about 2 years into that, 2.5 years into that, I was like on a Saturday morning working with my checkbook and balancing it, and just aware that, man, I had taken out barely a student loan for my master's. I had worked all the way through my master's, and I didn't have much to pay back, thankfully. And yet I was still, with a master's as a teacher, not having enough money to cover. I wanted organic produce. I wanted a massage a week because I consider that preventative health 101. And I had basic housing, a basic car, wasn't living in luxury, but just, didn't have enough. I wasn't comfortable. And I was, seeing a future for myself of decades of being locked in the same job. And it wasn't okay with me, because I was wanting the sense of adventure and travel and fun and abundance and joy and play, not like this thing I was getting set up for, this career trajectory. So I looked around. When I say looked around, I sat in meditation and kind of asked questions to my guidance and just kind of like stood out underneath the sun or the stars to receive guidance, and created the space so that I could hear it. And I was guided ultimately to a friend, a colleague who had turned me on to the international school system. So I did what I had to do to get to the weekend recruiting where international school heads came in from all over the world. And I was sitting in a bunch of different hotel rooms each day throughout the day, doing a slew of interviews, got a bunch of job offers around the world, and chose to go to Taiwan, an international school in Taiwan, because I considered the Chinese and the yogic culture, the Indian subcontinent yogic culture, to both not only be the seat of understanding how subtle energy works, but also still working from that premise. Not like us in the West, where like the alchemy that went on in that very island you're living on, and over on the continent, went underground and into the mystery schools. They've kept it alive in the East. So that's where I was for 10 years. I went over to and worked as a teacher and an administrator in an international school in Taiwan, and then in the Chinese New Year breaks went and traveled throughout Southeast Asia. A lot of the time it was Thailand, and I would go to this particular island where I would get a lot of treatments and go to the monasteries, and that's what I would do too on the weekends. I would investigate the treatments that they would do from the traditional Chinese medical system. I got trained in Qigong and began to teach Qigong. Had a lot of understanding gained from about the energy flows and how they flow in the body and the subtle energy system itself. Went over to India during my last Chinese New Year break, the 10th year I was there, and got trained as a yoga teacher in India, formally trained. And so then I returned to the States after writing my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, from still living over there in Taiwan. It had started out as my PhD's dissertation, and it became What If There's Nothing Wrong? And it's just this complete view of the contrast with our holistic system in the East, and then contrasting that against our reductionist system in the West due to science. And so understanding that there's more suffering from my perspective. Like, John, if you can visualize this, when I was like traveling, let's say going to the morning market on my scooter in Taiwan before I would go in to teach, because they were open early, and I was getting my veggies and fruit fresh, I would see like a monk dressed in monk garbs, monk robes. They have different colors for different sects of Buddhism. And they'd be like on their scooters with plastic bags. It was still plastic use back then, full of their produce. And I remember marveling at the frequency with which I would see monks out and about in society. And it happened when I was in Bangkok, traveling one break, where I was in Bangkok, and there was a monk waiting for, I don't remember, I want to say Subway, but there wasn't a Subway at the time. But it was that kind of mundane, everyday thing I saw the monk at. And he had a cell phone in one hand, dressed in his robes, golden robes there, and his a cigarette in the other hand. So what that impressed upon me with my consciousness and my framing coming from the States and the background I went over there with, and the intentions I went over there with, I was like, oh my God. So there are these reminders everywhere to work within, the power of going within, to look within. And then there's also the concept over there of saving face, particularly intense with the Chinese, where, you don't ever affront somebody. So that's the last thing you want to do, is cause anyone to lose face. And that if you react with any sense of emotional expression of intensity out in public, you've lost face. And that aspect of self-management, and that we are over there expected to manage ourselves and go within and look within in order to do so. That was the message I ended up with from my perspective. So I came back to the States with this understanding of, man, are we suffering unnecessarily in the West because we run from our minds. Like we have a big boogeyman or a monster under the bed, or, oh no, if I look in, I'm going to find my crazy. And some of that's the Catholic Church's upbringing, and some of that's just our own history in the West. And I'm not blaming it all on the Catholic Church by any means, but I've had particularly interesting patterns show up within my clients who have a Catholic upbringing, where there's even more fear, and they carry around even more shame, and there's like an extra tinge of fear about looking within. So just leave that for now. But that's what I came back to the West with. And so I dropped classroom teaching in 2010, and I went into this work full time and created my business. And like in 2011, Voice America approached me, asking me to do a radio show on the Mayan galactic ruin, part in the Mayan galactic alignment. Have you heard around the December 21st, 2012 thing?
No. Oh, about when the world was supposed to end?
Well, that was one of the takes, yeah. And that's what they said to me, the rep from Voice America. He's like, can you help debunk the myth of what you just said, John? And I was like, hey, I'm not focusing on this December 21st, 2012 prediction anywhere in my business. I'm focusing on the spiritual path, holistic health and wellness, working with your consciousness. And so I said, all right, let me have 48 hours. I'll get back to you. And as soon as I hung up, it was a growing feeling that became a billboard size, like neon letters glow of a yes. So I did it. And I interviewed a bunch of scientists from my first book around who's created ways to measure subtle energies effects and meditation's effects, but then brought in a ton of experts too around what that meant, that December 21st, 2012 date to the Mayans. And then I came to find out that the yogic culture, Yogi Bhajan, made predictions around 2012, as well as it wasn't just the Mayans. And it wasn't the ending of the world, it was the end, what they understood from their unbelievably enormous astrological and mathematical capacities. I've gone to the Mayan ruins taking people on VIP retreats frequently, but I was actually eventually asked to be one of the experts on a cruise from Florida to the Mayan Chichen Itza ruins, the main ruins that had the ball court where they created the Mayan calendar. They have this astronomy observatory there, and then they have another really cool one outside of the Teotihuacan, Mexico City ruins. So they were really, like, in everything's sacred numerology, the way they built their pyramids. And so they just had this advanced way of working with astronomy and understanding the stars. And that was their nighttime entertainment, back then. They'd lay down and look at the sky. So they had this understanding, of an end of one era on December 21st, 2012, and the beginning of a new one. And the old one was, so later on I went on an equinox to those Teotihuacan ruins outside of Mexico City, and they're more Aztecian than Mayan. So it was my first time more with Aztecian energetics and influences. And I asked we hired a native guide, and I asked him, after already having had that radio show and being a specialist on that yoga cruise to the Chichen Itza in 2012 on that date, December 21st, where we had that ceremony with the Mayan shaman. And I was seen, there were television crews there on December 21st, 2012, and I was seen as far away as Poland on TV because it was a big deal. So I never completed that story. There you go. And so flash forward to 2019, 7 years later, I hired that guide, and I asked him, what's the difference between the old era and the new one? And he said, the old one's one of destruction, the new one's one of construction. So I've been working with that concept to the understanding of 2012 to 2032 are what's considered humanity's spiritual awakening. And from everything I've been able to glean and understand, and I wrote my second book about this called Vibrational Upgrade, A Conspiracy for Your Bliss. It's the most intense evolutionary learning curve we're up against ever. Yeah. So there's a lot of mayhem. And so I've been helping sort people out through it and awaken to their inner selves and get more purified with their ego mind, understand the effects of different aspects of life on what they end up thinking about day to day and what they end up feeling and what they end up choosing or not choosing.
Do you think that COVID is a part of this, in the sense that, like, I've been discussing this with my partner and a number of other people over the past year, that, I've termed it the Great Leveler, because it seems collectively as though the world has hit like a global rock bottom, and a lot of people are suffering really, really bad mental health issues, emotional problems, physical health, and being forced into doing something about it as a result. Do you think that that's a kind of fair assessment of what's going on?
Oh, John, I love that you asked that question and every single word you chose to put in it. Yes. And to elaborate on that simple response, if you would like, I will.
Yes, please do. Yeah.
There's just so much I could say, and I want to keep it in a direction that I feel like will help your show and your listeners. So one of the aspects of the human system when we're working with natural healing is it's like you know how a fever needs to peak before it breaks? That's what I've seen, whether it's an emotional issue or it's a mental pattern or it's a physical malady like cancer or a tumor or somebody comes to me with. I'm not working with health as much nowadays in that way anymore. It's not as fun and light for me. It's the body, the mind, the spirit system that we are blessed with purges it in a way that shows up as the fever needs to peak before it breaks. Now, why I said I love every word that you chose in that question was because you talked about rock bottom, hitting rock bottom. And I've been asking this quite a lot of questions around this because, John, I've been talking about the fact that we're going through the most intense evolutionary learning curve since 2011. All over the place. With my third book I wrote, I'm talking about it in there too. And in all these interviews and all of the, I mean, just all these summits, all of these free monthly calls I'm doing just to help people sort through it because it's an intense time. And so one of the things that's helpful here is typically, whenever somebody comes to work with me, a lot of people need a physical issue or a crisis in their lives to cause them to seek out more than what they had been currently living as their status quo. And so they come to me beyond the doctors, beyond the psychoanalysts, beyond, wanting to understand the holistic reason and working through it that way, natural way. And then there's a smaller segment of people who are actually my client avatars and who end up in my mastermind getting trained in the system I created, Vibrational Upgrade, who work proactively and understand that this is our lives and we have the power of choice and we're creating what happens in our lives with every choice. And even to the point, John, that like 85% of our daily choices, what we're doing and what we're not doing, come from the subconscious and the unconscious. So the thoughts that we hear in our conscious mind, with a mind and consciousness that hasn't been worked with through some of the tools I've mentioned and more, 15% only of the thoughts that you hear that you're making your choices from, which means that we are all set up to live robotically and set up to live on remote control and set up to live repeating the past. So I found when COVID hit, people were expecting me to espouse my wisdom about it, and I didn't, except to say I've been talking about this for years, and apparently not enough people chose proactively. So let me back up to like 2012 or 13. I was working with a chiropractor treating him. And one session he asked me, and I didn't know until later that he was an alcoholic. One session he was laying on the table and I was at his head and he said, "Do you think people really need to hit rock bottom in order to change?" And in that moment, at that time, for him, without knowing he was an alcoholic, without knowing that his marriage was starting to get close to splitting up because of the drinking and that he was engaging in dating a stripper, like all of this would come out later. I said, yes. So I don't call myself a healer. I call myself an energy medicine practitioner or a subtle energy expert or yeah. So I don't call myself a healer because then that makes somebody have something to heal. I work in the potential. That's my favorite zone rather than helping somebody with a crisis or a problem. But it just seems like people will go on that remote control and not do anything until they're forced to, a huge segment of the population. So not enough of them had woken up to like maybe the ringing in their ears that started around 2015 or some crisis that maybe they lost their job, they lost a marriage, and they lost and some physical issue came. I've talked to so many people throughout 2012 to like 2017-ish, even nowadays, but more so in that time frame where they just had so many crises hit all at once, which was nature's way or their soul's way or the higher self's way of forcing them to change.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what I've been talking about in all my books. I mean, I hit my rock bottom in 2009 and then came into formal recovery in 2010. And then ever since then, I've been on this journey. And in 2014, 15, I wrote my first book, and I've since written 5 books. And
Mm.
the latest book that I've just written is actually, like, the 4 books before were all self-published, but everything that I wrote about in those books is exactly what you were just saying there, which is about people needing to change, and about finding whatever works for them, whichever spiritual path works for them, in order for them to have this transformation. And it's just astonishing now, like specifically this past
Yeah.
12 to 18 months, how many people are hitting a rock bottom in many different ways. Not only like in my personal life, but also I can just see it, on social media. You can see it like, and in the entertainment industry. It's everywhere, and it makes complete sense to me what you've said about this transformation now of moving towards construction. That I think the difficulty though is that it seems as though we're actually in complete and utter chaos. I mean, I'm very, very lucky as a result of my recovery and my program that I'm very, very grounded, and it takes a lot to kind of knock me. I mean, I've had a few things over the last year that have kind of tested me, but
Sure.
I've been able to maintain my sobriety, maintain my sanity, keep doing my daily program, including prayer and meditation, and taking
Excellent.
inventory and looking at myself. But
Yep. Yep.
looking outwardly, it's kind of like it's quite disturbing how much chaos there is out there. And you said it will take until what, 2032, did you say? That's quite a long that's
I
quite
did
a
my
long
20-year window, but we're halfway there. And so COVID was needed as like a catapult because of what you're saying right now.
Yeah, yeah. It makes sense. I mean, well, even if you look at it on the kind of the global scale, the planet can't survive, can it, if we carry on doing what we're doing? And I mean, even David Attenborough, God bless him, said that he thinks it's too
Bless.
late. He said he thinks it's too late, and that is just an ominous warning. I mean, I think that there's all this kind of like conspiratorial talk about the Great Reset happening now as a result of COVID, but I don't think that there's any conspiracy about it. I think it's just quite simply the world's leaders have realised that everything needs to change, like, immediately, and if it doesn't, then we're done.
John, if you check out what I was just saying, I worked on protecting the environment in the 90s and came out of it at the same time Al Gore did, and started touring the world with his movie An Inconvenient Truth about global warming and the crisis that he won a Nobel Peace Prize for.
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm really humble. Part of that's from living amongst the Chinese, and part of that's my English background, and just the grace of the divine and being able to flow a higher vibration through my system to help others, and just the natural skills I have and that I've learned to cultivate. It humbles me. So I don't, like, whenever, and there's countless times a day when one of my masterminders or 3Mers, Magic Manifestation and Money Flow, when I say 3M, that's my signature program, that people will go through before they get into the mastermind, if they come into the mastermind, if I'm inviting them. I'll give them an intuitive reading on some question they have about their daily life, and I'm right. And they'll come back and they'll say, you were right. Or they'll come back and have learned, like, from either listen, most of them know to listen. That's why they're in the program, because they know how my guidance works, to get their backs until they're more equipped to get their own backs with their guidance getting online, so to speak. So I don't say I told you so. I don't even talk about my predictions coming right. But in fact, I was working with a woman. I brought her on to the virtual retreats during COVID time instead of being over there, from England, around the Avebury area in Wiltshire. And she did a practice reading, and I decided to, instead of giving it to one of my students, I'm like, I'll do it. So I did. And she said, your predictions specifically about something will come true. And I have just been talking about the spiritual awakening time so much and so redundantly, that it's painful for me to say and to look at humanity being requiring such a massive bounty of suffering in order to do what the hell is right. Like that destructive part of within each of us. And the old era was about destruction. The new era was about construction and is about construction. And when I was teaching in the classroom, there was a story we were reading. The question came up: are humans inherently good or evil? I gave the kids extra credit for researching it. I researched it. I came back with the Dalai Lama's response when he was asked, are humans inherently good or evil? And he said, well, if you look at it, we wouldn't still be here if we were inherently evil. But there's one person who does the baking of the bread. There's another person who does the construction of the homes. There's another person who raises the sheep and the goats for the milk. So we work together constructively. And I know one of the things I talk about, especially in my second book, is the feminine coming through more. And rather than like and when I say feminine, I do not mean women. I mean, within each of us, there's masculine and feminine traits. Think of the yin yang. So, right. So that coming into balance, part of coming out of the sense of going out there, striving, taking action, yang energy, being balanced is with the collaboration and the cooperation in the community, the more yin energy. And so that's breaking through. And I have this one client, I've had him for years. He's a scientist up in Canada. He lives up north of Toronto. I've met him in person. He's trained in my energy medicine, actually. He's driven down to Florida from Canada 2 different times. But he's been a regular client of mine for, I would say now, 5 or 6 years. And he used to work on environmental consulting. I've helped move him into retirement per his request. And in retirement, he's been so hurting to write something about, we're losing time here. We're right on the edge here. So he's focused on environmental assessments, and what that now implies for, in his retirement, what that implies for global warming. And I don't know if I agree with God blessed David Attenborough in his soothing voice of like no other.
The voice of velvet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, for the record, I actually don't agree with him either. It's just a very ominous warning, and I think that, I mean, I want to actually ask you how you stand on. So, my latest book is called All Is One: The Science and Spirituality of Consciousness, and I spent the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 months of writing it and researching it was all to do with understanding what both science and spirituality have to say about consciousness and about a higher power, God, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, my belief since coming into recovery and the journey that I've been on is that the all is one part of it is that God is everything. God is the universe. You know, everything is one. You know, everything manifests from the base energy, which is what we call spirit, however you want to deem it. And if you kind of follow that way of thinking, ultimately everything is already fated, I suppose, in a way, because everything that's happening and everything that has happened and everything that will happen is always going to happen. So this process that we're going through is inevitable, and there isn't actually any point in fighting the process or, you know, wanting anything different from the process. Ultimately, what it boils down to is acceptance of the process and an acceptance of your part in the process. And I actually had an epiphany the other day because I'm believe it or not, I'm going through the steps again, the 12 steps on chocolate, because I put the alcohol down and then I became a chocolate addict for the last 7 years. And I put chocolate down about 3 weeks ago, and I've been completely abstinent from it. And I've been going through the steps with my sponsor. And I was doing this work, and I was talking about self-will, and the question was, how has your self-will helped you in moderating your use of chocolate? And the answer to that question was, it hasn't worked at all. Like, my self-will has never, ever, ever worked when it comes to moderating my chocolate. But then the follow-on thought, which was the major epiphany, was actually myself will has never, ever, ever worked with anything in my life. So whenever I've had a plan for something and I've said like, right, this is what I'm going to do, this is when I'm going to do it by, and this is how the outcome is going to be, it never, ever works out that way. Like ever. And I went back through my life. I went back through my life and I was thinking about all the major things that I've done with my life and how this has turned out and how that's turned out. Nothing, not one thing. I could not think of one thing that has ever turned out the way that I intended it to be. And therefore, whenever I just hand it over to the universe and I just go with the flow and just ask, for me, what my higher power wants me to do for it, to serve it, as in the universe, how can I be of service? That is when life just flows, and that is when the good things happen. So it's all tied in with this kind of all is one concept, and I just wanted to understand what your thoughts are on that.
Well, that was beautiful to listen to and receive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Makes me exhale, knowing that there's another one out there. So there's so many ways to respond to that. The first one I want to give you is that I remember back in when I was more close, I was still very Chineseified and not American, and it was the worst culture shock out of any culture shock I've ever experienced, coming back to the States after living in Asia for 10 years. And like 2 years in, son of one of the metaphysical stores I was giving workshops out of was an alcoholic, and I was giving workshops, that did energy clearings and activations around people's consciousness. And so he turned to me and asked for some one-on-one sessions, and I worked with him, and he was in the 12-step program. What do you call it? You call it a fellowship, right?
Yeah, the fellowship, yeah.
Yeah, I like how you call that. I've not ever heard it applied to the 12-step program before. And so I met other people who came in from NA, Narcotics Anonymous, to clients who wanted to be clients throughout the years. And when I went in depth with that one son of the owner of that metaphysical store, it seemed to me that what at the time, I don't know what it's like now, what he even came away with was that the 12-step program was missing the spiritual component, and that there was like a leap into meditation, a leap out of prayer only and into meditation and into working with consciousnness and subtle energy and God or the divine, or like you said, however you want to frame it, that was missing. And so that's what he was turning to me for. So I just wanted to give you that. And the other part about what you wrote about all is one, I have a chapter in my third book called Reasonable Dragons, applying, I don't remember the subtitle, man, but it's something like along the lines of applying the field of unlimited possibility so that logical magic is the new norm. And it's talking in there, I talk a whole chapter about unity. And I'm also in there at that point. Now, my first book is the longest. It's the text, really, and there's a ton of science in it about subtle energies, any of the science that exists at that time or existed. But by the time of my third book, I was like, why, when I know something is true for me, and I use naturalist observation, which is in fact the third method of different scientific methods to do scientific research. Naturalist observation is the third. Meditation itself is naturalist observation. Why do I need science to tell me that choosing this and not choosing that is good for me? I can just observe that. So I was kind of debunking our over-reliance in the West on science. And actually, my first book talks about, I have a quote at the front about science and religion coming together is what's needed. So I feel like we're in such a brand new time right now, and there is such a collapse of, that's a main word that I've been using, it's a collapse of the old paradigm. So where there's been division, where there's been not unity, whether it's within our own mind, body, spirit system, or it's within a community, a country, or the globe, all of the misalignment out of unity is collapsing. And we can see that showing up in the increased marches, and even in Russia, the protests that are happening that haven't for years. And in Chile had protest marches last year. I mean, it's just all over the globe, Hong Kong, forget the United States, because, or you guys even, because, we're both countries used to the protest, but countries that aren't, just like the where there's been an abuse of power, whether it's within our own selves or it's external around us, that's collapsing, because that abuse of power, everything is being brought into a divine alignment. And the ultimate bottom line is, like I was talking before, I get my clients and students backs with intuitive reads until we've shifted their system enough that they can rely on their own, and trust it and follow it. And that comes from my signature program, like I said, is magic, manifestation, and money flow. It's called that because once you shift into the flow, you're able to manifest as if by magic, and that includes money. So it's what you said, forcing, making happen, sticking to a plan, all of that is non-divine, and none of that is, they're all old strategies and tools for the old paradigm. The new one is to allow the heart to speak. Oh, that's uplifting, I'm going to do that. And then let the universe figure out the how via our guidance shown to us.
Well, this is kind of like music to my ears, what you're talking at the moment. But I suppose what is difficult in what you're explaining is that you're at the kind of like very end of the gradient of kind of believability. And what I mean by that is, when you said earlier, which is basically what my book is all about, which is that there needs to be a merger of science and spirituality. You're dealing with a culture like you've talked about. You've gone over to the East, and I spent time in the East when I was younger as well, and it completely opened my mind to all these concepts. Mm. You're dealing with a culture in the West that is predominantly science-based, and you can see it, like I see it all the time all over social media. Anybody that kind of like talks airy-fairy spiritual bollocks, people like they'll jump on it and they'll stamp on it with the scientific rhetoric. And actually, like, science is nothing more really than opinions that are actually changeable. I mean, how often does the science change? We've seen the science change over and over and over throughout this COVID period. Mm-hmm. So to take people from that perspective to the perspective that you and I have got, and you're at I would say, like I said, like the extreme end, in the sense that you're living and breathing it. So you're on the front line, you're doing this work, you're working with subtle energies, you're helping people to evolve, to awaken, from the dream state. Spiritually, you're kind of like, you've got the torch and you're leading the way. And then you've got people like me that are kind of like following you, and trying to explain in layman's terms to the average person on the street who, how this manifests in their life, like, and it's really, really difficult. This is where I keep I'm banging my head against a brick wall. Yeah.
Let me cut you off. And by the way, dark chocolate is it's good for you.
That's okay then. Yeah, I've been told I could eat dark chocolate, but I just
5% or more.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm not going to go there just yet, though.
All right, but I challenge you, mate, to let yourself have a bar or whatever a bar of the dark chocolate, and only a chunk of it each night. I challenge you to let yourself step into that moderation.
Do you know what it is? Actually, believe it or not, what I realized when I started to do this work on the chocolate addiction was, and I never knew this before, I don't know why, but I just didn't know, that chocolate is absolutely full of caffeine, and I'm allergic to caffeine. Like, I can't, and I don't mean it brings me out in hives or it makes me have an anaphylactic shock. I just mean that whenever I drink caffeine, it upsets my stomach. It makes me piss like a racehorse. And it's almost, well, it is a stimulant, obviously caffeine's a stimulant, and it just makes me feel like I've had speed or something. So
wait, John, I can only handle it in green tea, not coffee.
Yeah, well, because there's so much of it in chocolate as well, it has the same effect. And because when I eat chocolate, I binge on it like madly. I think that's the problem, because I can still eat sugar, like I can still have a piece of cake and or a bit of ice cream or whatever, and it'd be absolutely fine. But chocolate in particular, it just doesn't work.
A hormonal gig there that's going on. So the serotonin gets released from eating dark chocolate, not milk chocolate. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to switch to the dark chocolate, and just have a like square of a huge bar made of a bunch of smaller squares a night, you would actually
Yeah.
be doing homeopathically.
Cool. I'll take that.
Okay, excellent. All right, so let's go over to the other thing that you said.
Yeah.
This is such a great question. I'm really appreciating you in this interview and the timeliness of your questions and the substance of them, John. Thank you. Because you probably heard it a little bit, perceived it in my tone earlier. The pain that, I mean, I don't embody it, but like I actually, and I don't easily cry, I don't hold back, but it's just not something, I'm pretty neutral observer. Like I get joyous, but I don't like, I'm not reactive or highly emotional from all the years of meditating. And so I cried in public on the first event I did once COVID hit the West for humanity requiring such a bout of suffering in order to shift. And what I train my students in who are getting trained and certified in vibration upgrade system is, okay, so now, and this is interesting, John, because they have to go through 2 levels and work on other people before they're at the level of master where they start to shift finally out of, oh, hey, I can heal. And I remember I said I don't call myself a healer. I can shift people, but training them to only do it when it is asked for by the person. So walking around trying to communicate to somebody who is not evolved yet, hasn't had that crisis or mixture of 3 crises to cause them to hit rock bottom, if they're functioning in that way at that level, you're gonna bang your head against the wall. There is this process of this awakening into evolution, into living in that flow that occurs within each person's consciousness. And it's in part why we can hear the same piece of spiritual wisdom 2 years ago and hear it differently now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that evolution of one's consciousness, where it seeds differently, that 3rd year, for example, that has to go through enough within a person who is of the general public that you're talking about, that you want to just shake and wake up. Everybody has to do it in their own speed. And so it's like this real interesting hands-off approach, especially for people once they get like trained in being able to run the energy on a person and really see that they can shift somebody, and the desire to help the husband, help the brother, help the sister-in-law, help the grandparent, I mean, like just help. And that was funny, but not because it has to be chosen.
Yeah. I totally relate to that, because when I first got sober, I just wanted everybody to get, not necessarily to get sober, but I just wanted everybody to get well, and I just wanted to, sing it from the rooftops and paste it all over my social media. And actually, it doesn't work. Like it's one of the key sayings in the fellowship is it's attraction rather than promotion, and you never ever try to help somebody unless they ask for your help.
Yep. I say that like as they open up to their intuition more and more, they being my students, and they become able to even read a system. Like I just had a reminder, one of my longest term students who's at the Grand Dragon Master level now and has been working with me in the mastermind for 3 years. She's starting to open up and get readings on people. And I had to remind her, remember, you're not ever walking up to somebody in the supermarket and saying, hey, I perceive this about you. That's not what we're doing here. And in fact, you don't want to be that wide open, because you'll go nuts, man. You don't want that much information about everything going on around you, whether it's in the collective or the people in the store around you. So it's like a really different time now. And it's beautiful, that heart that wants to help. But if you can channel that into somebody who is saying, yes, please, you know how much more effective you're going to be?
Well, this is how I've channeled it into this podcast, because what I recognized was when I was living in London 4 or 5 years ago, and I was like sponsoring a lot of people in the fellowship, and I was, constantly doing recovery work. And I also worked as a counsellor in prisons as well. So I was
My
like,
God, I bet you were busy.
yeah, everything that I was doing was like revolved around helping people. And not only did I nearly burn out, but I also realized that, I couldn't keep it. I couldn't keep that level of, like you say, openness. I couldn't keep it up, really. It was just too much. So a couple of years ago, when I began the podcast, I recognized that, having these conversations does help a lot of people. Like, I get enough feedback to know that, even if it just helped one person, that would be enough. But, it clearly helps a lot of people. And it's a safe environment. It's like, we have this conversation, it goes out there, and whoever's meant to hear it will hear it. And I love that. I just love the fact that if you're meant to hear this podcast, you'll be listening to it.
That's the beauty of the divine. We can't orchestrate that with our mind. John, yeah. I wanted, again, this is another example of how beautiful the flow is in our interview. I'm aware that we're getting down to time, and so I'm rushing. I know that after this year of COVID, the amount of people who have come in onto my platform on the free monthly call, for example, and have come into my free Facebook group being needy, and the expectation of projected onto me to serve more because I'm that kind of a person doing that kind of work in this kind of a crisis. I have had to manage my output and where I choose to give to the point that I have been facing burnout, and holding the space for the collective to shift. Yeah, because I do a lot of deep work, even unconsciously. I don't even know all that I'm doing, but I see the results of it. And I teach some of the practices that I know I'm consciously doing, but just the way I am, there's just stuff that's happening on the collective at an unconscious level. And so, burnout is not a good thing. And so that's a sign of dryness, and we're supposed to be vivacious and the vital life force, energy, chi, prana, it's juicy, it's juice. And so our bones are meant to be juicy. We're meant to have energy and vitality. One of my taglines is awake, alive, and ready to thrive. So using that as a measurement of, what I'm doing is not causing that. So where can I make different choices, and then make those different choices, take those actions. It's important, especially when you have a heart that wants to help, and redirecting it to where the help can actually be received. It's a curve, and I'm in that now. I'm actually going through a bunch of shifts myself right now. The last free monthly call I gave, John, check it out. The beginning of it, I'm saying, isn't it interesting? How many of you are on this call because you want something healed, or you have a problem or an issue you want addressed? Because I have been for a decade now, monthly, having people come on there, raise their hand, and get work done for free on them. And so I'm talking about instead. I am using, while I used to work with cancer and chronic pain and health issues, it was too heavy for me. I shifted, that was dematerializing matter. And for years now, I've worked on materializing into matter, manifestation instead, because it's lighter and more fun. And I have a natural gift with it, the manifesting part. And so I said, using the subtle energies and working within the consciousness, not to solve a problem, but to live up to one's potential, to live in the possibilities, because in this collapsing of the old paradigm, there's all this new that wants to be birthed, all this innovation, especially starting this year, that wants to come in to create our new paradigm. And so there's all of these possibilities and the unlimited field of possibilities surrounding us, like the chi, the Tao that's in all life around our bodies, in nature, wants to be connected with. Sorry for that car alarm. And so, and so I said that. And then, like, my last book, the fourth book, The Dragon Master Creatrix, that also says it. But I give applied examples of it. I've been talking about this for a while. It wasn't new. And I used to say, if you're still addicted to the struggle paradigm, I'm not the right mentor for you. But the interesting thing, John, was that when I said that, the two people who I called on, both of them started out saying, I had an issue. I had a problem I wanted to heal or focus on. I don't know if I should say it now. And the first one had ears ringing, which is a total sign of spiritual awakening. And the second one was grieving from loss. And so it's consistent of where I am. I'm usually 10 years ahead, frankly. And so I'm saying, let's live in the possibilities and the potential, and where the market is and where people are used to using energy for healing are.
Yeah. One question I've got for you, Alison, is like usually people that come, like walk this path, they normally have some sort of trauma in the childhood, or something that's happened. I know you said obviously that you kind of felt connected just to nature, but was there anything that happened in your childhood, or was there anything that kind of set you off on this path?
So I'm standing here smiling because I love what you're asking, because it's on the energetics of what I'm talking about. And because one of my masterminders, who's a really brilliant astrologer, lives over in not Northamptonshire, Cambridgeshire, over there with you. She came to meet me during one of the retreat sessions after I had finished leading them all, and she wasn't on that retreat round, in Glastonbury from Cambridge, and gave me an astrology reading that went on for 3 days. Had worked on my chart, ridiculously extensive and beautiful. Yeah. And one of the things she said to me was, "You have absolutely no drama lines. I've never seen a chart like this in your childhood." No.
None?
No.
No trauma at all?
I know you want to hear it. I know you're looking for it. You can't believe there's somebody who's naturally doing this without having a journey to go through to get there. But no.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's quite unheard of, isn't it? It's normal. There's usually something that's in there, but yeah, no, I mean, I can believe it. It's did you tell you about past lives as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on my own past. I mean, I felt them kind of coming to the surface when I flew over Asia the first time landing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been at the level of working I hesitate with saying this. I've never said this out loud before in an interview. I've worked in like a couple of levels down from Buddha before in lifetimes, is my understanding.
Yeah.
People who work with me intimately, my masterminders, know that. And so, John, thank you for pulling that out of me. I'll just trust that was supposed to come out today. And if you look at the message I just said, about living up to our potential, working with our consciousness and in our subtle energy system to live up to our potential, to reach it, to live in the possibilities rather than the suffering. Perhaps I needed a childhood trauma-free in order to have that message at this time on planet Earth.
Well, what's coming through for me is like, I have a very, very good bullshit detector, and whenever anybody's talking from ego as well, I click onto that straight away, and that's not what I'm getting from you. Everything that you've said today, on this interview has been from the heart, and and I believe what you're saying, and I believe that it's kind of, the pure energy of spirit is what you're working with, and it's what's talking, and that's like what we need. we need people to lead us through this, like, this new time of construction towards a better future. And there'll be people listening to this, and some people will just be thinking this is way out there, and this is like what are they talking about? But I've seen enough, like through my experiences with Vipassana meditation, my experiences with ayahuasca and psilocybin, and my general experiences of spiritual experiences, like just daily, like, just happening through doing the work. I've seen and I've experienced so many supernatural phenomenon that, none of this is bullshit to me. Like, this is like real. And especially when, as I said earlier, when people close to me are hitting their rock bottoms and they're recognizing that the only way through this is to overcome the fear and find a level of faith that works. It just proves it time and time again, and unfortunately, those that don't break through that fear and live in faith, they tend to die. They tend to commit suicide, overdose, just literally like obliterate themselves with drugs and alcohol, and and that's kind of like where we're at. I think on a personal level, it's like, what path do you want to take? Do you want to go down that route where there is nothing good down there, or do you want to kind of change? And and go on this new journey. That's where it feels like we're at.
Yeah. And is it possible that this is a selection process, self-selection? I mean, you talked about fate, destiny, and things being meant to be. I wanted to touch on that, but what feels like it's going to be even more helpful right now is that it's not so out there. The work that I do, if we're making our choices, the majority of them day in and day out from the past and robotically, and you are wanting to break into a new behavioral pattern. I have specialty certification as a behavioral change specialist from my personal trainer certification in the ICF. And it's interesting to me because I'm doing this work to help people actually make behavioral changes that will show up in your physical life, whether that's your body image, or it's how you eat, or it's how you relate with others, or it's how much money you make, or how you make your money with more fulfillment. So if you have this belief, if you're a person who is locked into a corporate job and it dries you out, and you have a family at home and you use that corporate job for feeling safe to get in the States, health insurance for your kids, and you feel like you don't have any choice, that is, I can do clearings on the fifth chakra where it's related to choice. I can do clearings on where you feel like you're unworthy of having what you want, or you're the reliable one, or you're the responsible one. And you can hear some of the childhood entrainment or conditioning. If you were the responsible kid and taking care of your brothers and sisters, that gets imprinted from ages 2 to 8. So by me being able to do certain clearings on people, you change your daily life. It's not just getting in touch with the divine within us at all. It's allowing for our highest version of ourselves to emerge, but apply to the daily mundane level. So if you're depressed or you're feeling, here's the thing, I don't know how many people are aware that we're just a bunch of sponges, this element of separation that we think and perceive that, or have been told, not perceive, that we have. You're solid, you're over there, John, I'm solid, I'm over here, I'm Allison, and we're separated. When in fact, all of us, I could go into a story, I'm not going to, in fact, all of us can sense what the general feeling is. Energy is our first language. You walk into a room, you assess if it feels good or not. You think that you're not getting information about what everybody else is feeling. So if you dare make your depressing thoughts only about you and your life, then you're not being wise enough or kind enough to your system.
All is one.
But you're also perceiving other people's depression. I've seen time and time again, especially the kind-hearted, sensitive people, but even not, where they're making like their depressive thoughts theirs, and it's flying in from their neighbor. Yeah. Literally.
Absolutely. I mean, people just absorb what's going on around them unless they've got the tools to keep it out, basically.
Yeah, or go higher. So that
go higher. Yeah. I mean, and that in itself is very difficult. I mean, that's something that I've struggled with over the years, is like not taking on board the energy of others, especially at work. I think that I suppose there's just different stages, aren't there? And the first stage, like at the very, very bare bones of it, is recognizing that everything isn't all right, like that you do that something's going to have to change. And that's the scariest part, I think, for everybody, because nobody likes change, do they? Nobody wants to admit that they're going to have to do something different, like radically different, in order to live a happy life, basically. I mean, we all just want to be happy, don't we? At the end of the day, I think that's at the bare bones of it. That's what we want. But in order to gain happiness, first you've got to have peace of mind, and to gain peace of mind, it takes quite a lot of work.
I don't think you have to have peace of mind to be happy. That's too big of a goal, man. You're setting yourself up for failure.
Okay.
You can have some peace of mind and still be happy.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to have it at all times, are you? That's like the impossible. That's kind of being enlightened. But I think that I actually started off my previous book with something along the lines of, like, if I had to quantify it, I'd say that I have peace of mind about 80% of the time. And
Yeah,
Like
I can see
if somebody said that like to you, I've got peace of mind 80% of the time, you kind of be thinking to them, you're lying. But that is true. Like when I break it down, for all the times that I'm miserable, anxious, um, fearful, angry, that probably takes up about 20% of my life in total, really. But it's taken me 10 years to get to that place, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of work on a daily basis. Like there's certain things that I have to do, like my meditation. Like it's an absolute, like meditating for me is as important as brushing my teeth. That's the way that I think about it, and all the other spiritual practices that I do each day. That's how I maintain a level of peace of mind that does enable to be happy, even in a pandemic when I'm locked down. Like that's the true measure, I think, of peace of mind and happiness. Can you be okay when the crisis comes?
Well, I've been saying for years, taking care of our energy field, our energetic hygiene is as important as brushing our teeth, meaning like clearing your field in the morning when you get up, whether that's with this command, like anything that went on during my dream time or anybody that is not of unconditional love that's in my field, please go to the light. Like any thoughts that are in my field from others around me, please clear my field up to a kilometer around me. Speaking to whoever you speak to, the divine, Archangel Michael, whatever. Use sage. Sage has been scientifically proven. Not that I need to say that with you, but anyway, the point is that yes, it's important. But John, I really want to tell the daily hygiene, the daily caretaking of the mind and consciousness, because everything's based on your state of mind. So I also want to say, though, what you already said, reiterating, there are stages, and you may get to a point where you may not need to rely on the meditation for your peace of mind anymore, because we do get to new set points. And you also said that, you also said that nobody likes change. So an implication we can take from that, or we can infer from that, therefore, that must be something inherently human. And it's the ego mind. We're given this ego mind to help navigate the physical plane. So back in the days of jungle living, lions and tigers, bears, oh my, do I go into flight or do I go into fight? We still have that ancient wiring in our adrenal cortex for our adrenal glands. And our ego mind structure is anything new, jungle, or unknown, jungle, we resist because the ego mind wants to protect us. So there is, expect resistance to change.
Yeah. Spot on. Absolutely.
I got to go, mate. I have so enjoyed this. I would love to talk with you more, but I have another one coming up real soon, and I need a space between.
No,
I'm sorry.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can we find you online, Dr. Alison?
Vibrationalupgrade.com, and then all my books are on Amazon if you want, but vibrationalupgrade.com.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck with everything in the future.
Likewise, John. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Namaste. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see a range of mutual aid organisations in the show notes. Also, don't forget that you can support the Life in Recovery podcast by visiting patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.